Okay, talking tennis. I am in the cab on the way to the airport after just spending the weekend in Winnipeg, not Toronto, but talking about Toronto. What a tournament for Jannik Sinner. Big week. I feel like that victory was good for tennis. It was good to have Jannik Sinner get a big title like this. I feel like he's, keeping pace again with Carlos Alcaraz and Holger Rune as those three super young guys. The other two have won big titles, been really deep. And Jannik, this is a good testament to the work that he's been putting in, the changes that he's made. Darren Cahill on the bag, one of the most legendary coaches in the game currently. Super impressive. Big win for him. Toronto's not the field that didn't have the field that other tournaments might have, and he didn't have to beat Alcaraz or Djokovic in the final, for example. But, that doesn't matter compared to winning, getting that winning feeling, getting that 1,000 points, That gives you confidence going into Cincinnati and then the U.S. Open. So, I think that that win helps experience. I was talking to Canadian player Alexis Galarneau yesterday, who's been on the Challenger Tour, but he just won his first Challenger, and he was talking about the experience of losing a Challenger final before that, and what you learn. I think Jannik Sinner's learned a lot from the losses he's had in finals, and now he's got over the line. So now he has that in his brain of what it feels like to win, what I did last time when I won. How can I do that again the next time he's in that situation? So I think this will be a big result for him going forward, and I'm excited to see what he can do at the U.S. Open because, he's one of, now after winning that, I think he's got to be in the top 5 or 6 contenders to win the title, and you never know. So, good tournament. Okay, talking tennis. I am in the cab on the way to the airport after just spending the weekend in Winnipeg, not Toronto, but talking about Toronto. What a tournament for Jannik Sinner. Big week. I feel like that victory was good for tennis. It was good to have Jannik Sinner get a big title like this. I feel like he's, keeping pace again with Carlos Alcaraz and Holger Rune as those three super young guys. The other two have won big titles, been really deep. And Jannik, this is a good testament to the work that he's been putting in, the changes that he's made. Darren Cahill on the bag, one of the most legendary coaches in the game currently. Super impressive. Big win for him. Toronto's not the field that didn't have the field that other tournaments might have, and he didn't have to beat Alcaraz or Djokovic in the final, for example. But, that doesn't matter compared to winning, getting that winning feeling, getting that 1,000 points, That gives you confidence going into Cincinnati and then the U.S. Open. So, I think that that win helps experience. I was talking to Canadian player Alexis Galarneau yesterday, who's been on the Challenger Tour, but he just won his first Challenger, and he was talking about the experience of losing a Challenger final before that, what you learn. I think Jannik Sinner's learned a lot from the losses he's had in finals, and now he's got over the line. So now he has that in his brain of what it feels like to win, what I did last time when I won. How can I do that again the next time he's in that situation? So I think this will be a big result for him going forward, and I'm excited to see what he can do at the US Open because, he's one of, now after winning that, I think he's got to be in the top 5 or 6 contenders to win the title, and you never know. So, good tournament in Toronto. I just saw that it was record ticket sales for Toronto for the ATP event, which is awesome. Canadian tennis is booming. People are, in other countries, tennis is like the 3rd or 4th biggest sport. In Canada, it's probably like the 5th or 6th or 7th. So it's been really good to see, the added interest across our country. I'm here in Winnipeg, or was here in Winnipeg. I'm just, like I said, in the cab to the airport now. And there's great, interest here for the Challenger. We got Jack Draper here. We got David Goffin. It's a crazy lineup in the Prairies. Anyways, that's my take on Jannik Sinner winning Toronto 2023.
Ready. Play.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. We've just been hearing the thoughts of Stephen Broughton from The Slice. And for the next 40 minutes or so, we're going to hear the thoughts of Vivek Jacob. Vivek, how are you doing? It's been a while.
I'm doing great. It was nice to have some tennis in Toronto and Montreal, as much as the rain tried to prevent that. But in the end, we got to the end of the tournament. So I thought it was some great tennis, a lot of upsets and a lot of dramatic action. Looking forward to recapping it with you.
Vivek, where exactly are you based in Canada?
I'm in Toronto. So.
Oh, you're actually in Toronto. Okay, cool. So, I mean, as a city and to some extent as a country, obviously with Toronto and Montreal sort of flipping each year between the WTA, is there a big vibe in the city the weeks before, and is there a bit of a cloud, certainly for tennis fans today?
There's definitely excitement after Wimbledon, and you kind of look forward to that being the next big event, and where as a preview to the US Open. Depending on who shows up, obviously, on the men's side, we missed Novak Djokovic. On the women's side, we missed Ons Jabeur. But I think there's a lot of hype that comes with this event. And I think the participation has always been great over the years, getting players like Roger Federer and Rafa Nadal. And, one of my fondest memories is watching Rafa Nadal the year he became number 1 for the first time.
Okay.
And that was en route to winning the Canadian Masters. So I think there's a lot of fond memories to be had in coming here. I'm sure people would have watched Carlos Alcaraz for the first time and thought, hey, maybe not quite at the level he was at Wimbledon, but pretty cool to see anyway, because, when he's on the court, you're guaranteed to see some live wire action.
I mean, Nadal is someone who's obviously had a lot of success in Canada. Let's bring it to the present day and somebody who had some success this week. What did you make of Jannik Sinner's run and then also his win in the final?
I was thrilled to see it. I think he should absolutely be in that conversation of being the biggest challenger to Carlos Alcaraz for the next decade plus. Obviously, Djokovic is still around in the present day, but I think when you look at the long term, a Sinner should absolutely be the biggest candidate to challenge and push Alcaraz. I think he's got a tremendous game. I love his backhand. And I think what really stood out to me over the course of this tournament, as Stephen was saying, yeah, he didn't play Carlos Alcaraz or Novak Djokovic, but there's a steeliness to him. And I thought, playing Alex de Minaur in the final and, breaking ahead, then getting broken back, then breaking ahead, getting broken back. I thought he kind of maintained his composure through that. I thought against Gael Monfils, that was a really tense match, and he needed to show some toughness in that. And so I think he's shown improvement in that regard. And I think it might be a strange thing to say, but seeing the way his semifinal went down against Djokovic at Wimbledon, and then seeing the way the final played out, would have made him realize some things, because I think he would have earned Djokovic's respect the year before by winning the first 2 sets and then going on to lose. And I think in this year's Wimbledon, he got the best of Djokovic right out the gate. And you have to earn that that level of respect from Novak. And so I think to push Novak at his best, I think that tiebreak could have gone either way. He will know, he kind of gifted that double fault and things kind of turned from there in that tiebreak. But I think all those little things have added up to him saying, yeah, I absolutely can be in this conversation.
I think that's interesting. You highlight that semi-final, because I think for neutral observers, I think it was quite a bruising defeat in a way for Jannik. We all appreciate the fact that he's still pretty young, but we also appreciate that you're playing arguably the best player of all time in the side of the net. But there were chances there, as you say, in that third set, but even right at the beginning of the match, 1 or 2 break points. And of course, against Novak, you really have to take them, as Hubie Hurkacz also found to his cost. And to some extent, Alcaraz didn't in the final. But I also think right now, we're sort of in the best moment for Jannik Sinner of the season. I think of the 3 surfaces, it's hard. And also, generally, he tends to perform slightly better in New York, at least to the eye. Maybe he's had some pretty good results in Australia, certainly at least 1, maybe 2 quarterfinals there. But we all remember that epic encounter last year against eventual winner, which I think has also aged quite well, bearing in mind the 12 months that Carlos has had since. And
you would argue that Sinner probably should have won that match.
Right. He had match points and was probably the better player for at least half of it. We all know the spectacular things that Carlos can produce, but on that occasion, despite the fact he didn't win the match, it was 50-50, just some unbelievable stuff from Jannik too. And as Stephen mentioned in the build-up as well, I think, having now won a big title, I think that will help him, because I think it would have been even though maybe de Minaur is slightly lower down the pecking order on the ATP rankings and also a couple of years older, and normally we sort of focus a bit more on a loss for them if they've had a few like this. I think Jannik needed that yesterday. If there'd been another loss, having been probably the favorite before, a bit like he was against Hurkacz a couple of years ago, I think that would have been bad. Do you see what I'm saying?
I agree 100%, especially when you factor in that coming into this final, he was already 4-0 against de Minaur, right?
Yeah.
So you have the better of the matchup. Everything is playing in your favor. And that's why I thought, obviously we wanted to see a Carlos Alcaraz, Jannik Sinner semifinal. That would have been the dream matchup. But I thought mentally it was going to put him in an interesting state, because you look at the 4 semifinalists and you're saying, okay, this is Jannik Sinner's tournament to lose now. And so what's your approach now when you've got the sort of target on your back and everyone is expecting you to come away with this tournament? And I thought the way he executed against Tommy Paul and closed it out against Alex de Minaur, that's what you want to see. It's like, hey, the expectations are set. You're supposed to deliver now. And you did. And so I'm very excited for him. And I like the way the narratives are sort of shaping up on the men's side here, because, with Alcaraz, there was obviously the Djokovic question after the French Open. And you were saying, okay, Djokovic kind of has made a statement here on who the best player in the world is. And so for Alcaraz to take him down at Wimbledon, of all places, it really has built that matchup up going forward. And now, we're waiting to see Sinner take that big step and possibly win a slam. And winning an event like this makes you believe that, hey, it could come as soon as this US Open.
And Jannik, I think, is one of 3 players. One is kind of obvious, one less so, and I'll come to the less so in a second. Jannik is one of 3 players who can go toe-to-toe with Carlos, who can beat Carlos at his best on various different days in various different continents. And I think none more so than on a hard court and in North America. as he proved in Miami when he beat him. Oh, no, sorry. It was Miami this year where he beat him. And then,
Yep.
of course, obviously going toe-to-toe with him in that quarterfinal last year. And I think he's beaten him on clay as well in Europe. So he is somebody, of course, Novak being the obvious one. The less obvious one is Tommy Paul, who I believe, off the top of my head, has a 2-0 record. He certainly beat him a year ago anyway. Tommy Paul is somebody, by the way, who causes Rafa a bit of trouble, as we saw in Paris-Bercy last year. So he is kind of a fly in the ointment for a couple of, I think, Carlos, if he isn't a legend yet, will go on to be a legend of the sport. What did you make of? We'll come to De Minaur as well, and definitely get his tournament in a second. But as we're on Tommy Paul, I think we also have to talk about Alcaraz. What did you make of Alcaraz's departure from the tournament and Tommy Paul's run?
Yeah, so it's interesting you tie those three together: Djokovic, Paul, and Sinner. I don't think it's a coincidence as far as the matchup is concerned that all three can hit that running, stomping, two-handed backhand.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is something that gives Alcaraz a bit of a problem.
Yeah.
And so looking at Paul's tournament, excellent tournament. The matchup specifically against Alcaraz, I don't think Tommy Paul is someone who's ever short on belief. I think that's something I really enjoy when watching him play. And I think that his movement was excellent against Alcaraz. I mean, obviously, we know Alcaraz loves to go to the drop shot, and it seemed like Tommy Paul was on it, had a read on it every single time and got to it no problem. Then you would argue that Alcaraz has established that he has the best forehand in the game now, but specifically in this matchup, in that match, Tommy Paul's forehand was probably executing at a higher level. And then you make enough of those backhand shots as well. And Alcaraz, again, not at his best in this tournament, but hey, that's why you play the games. That's why you play every week and you see what can happen. And he brought out some frustration in Alcaraz. We saw him throw a racket. We saw him yell at his box a little bit. And I think Tommy Paul can do that to you because, he's someone in terms of his jump this year and over the past 6 to 8 months.
Mm-hmm.
I think what's really impressive is he's not going to be someone who beats himself.
Alcaraz, then, is this sort of cause for concern, or you think Cincinnati and New York will see a completely different Carlos in terms of results?
Yeah, he learned so quick. And when you look at even the loss last year to Tommy Paul, he came away from that loss and said, hey, this is something I need to learn from as far as the pressure that's coming now with the expectations and the hype. And now I think there was a different level of expectations and hype put on him after winning Wimbledon. And so that's another thing that I think he needs to adapt to and adjust to. And I think he will. And it's just a question of how quickly he does it, because to go from where he was in losing that French Open semifinal to Djokovic and figuring things out in that matchup almost in real time in the Wimbledon final, and figuring out that, hey, I think I can actually out-defend you. And then, he probably went for a bit too much in that first set. And then the second set, you could see him sort of start to just absorb a bit more from Novak and say, hey, I'm just going to hang in the points a bit more. Maybe my shots aren't in full flow right now. And that was really what started to turn it around. And so I think his ability to learn so quickly is the most special thing about him. Novak compared that ability to adapt when he was talking about having elements of Roger, Rafa, and himself. And that was the attribute that he gave from himself, the ability to adapt. And so I think he's going to take this loss in stride, and he'll be ready for Cincy. He'll be ready for the US Open.
Is this the order of favorites right now for the US Open? Is it I mean, I think some people might put Novak first, some people might put Carlos. I think there's an argument for both. Personally, right now I would probably put Djokovic I'd put Carlos just ahead of Novak.
That's how close it is.
Say again?
That's how close it is. You can flip-flop anyway.
Yeah, you can flip a coin. And listen, you can make a case for both. I think it would be difficult to make a case for either to be third on the list, if you like. And my third would be Medvedev and probably Sinner right now. Does that make sense?
I think that does make sense. That sounds about right. You have to give the respect to Medvedev and everything he's accomplished on hard courts throughout his career. And Sinner by winning Toronto, and obviously we've seen what he can do on a hard court as well. Um, you know, we say there's a coin flip between Novak and Alcaraz for 1 and 2. There might be a coin flip now between Medvedev and Sinner for 3 and 4. And I think it might be that close between those two. That would be a fantastic matchup to watch. And I think going back to Novak and Carlos, I think what's interesting now for me is with Wimbledon, that was the first slam that we saw Novak play as the front runner in the slam count. And I think the Carlos win has almost given, as far as a narrative is concerned, something to chase again.
Yeah.
And we know how good he is at chasing. So I think he's going to be ready to go for the U.S. Open. I really hope we get the Alcaraz Djokovic rematch, because Djokovic is so good tactically and strategically that I think he is going to have a plan ready, a different plan ready. And I think for me personally, I would put Djokovic 1 and Alcaraz 2, because I think Novak is going to be very, very motivated to win this one.
I think it's an interesting narrative over the next couple of years, as, I mean, there aren't many left for him to break in terms of records. Novak, of course, there's the Wimbledon Roger record, but he's won each slam at least 3 times now. He's now in the lead in the overall slam race, and we know how he cleans up at the Masters. And Weeks at number 1 as well. So I'm with you a little bit in that I think I was quite intrigued to see how the next few tournaments would go for him, in terms of now having, as I say, pretty much achieved all there is to achieve in the sport. I think you're right. I think he'll try and use the Carlos thing to give him another burst. If he was to go on and win the US Open, I don't know. I mean, listen, he may prove me wrong, but what I have seen a couple of times in Novak's career is when there isn't a lot left to achieve, he does he's not quite, he's very different. They're all different. Him, Roger, and Rafa are very different, but he's not quite the same as Rafa, who plays each point as if it's his last, and sometimes to the detriment of Nadal. He is someone who will check out for a season, even where he's already secured number 1. I remember, I think 2 or 3 years ago, when he just needed to turn up at a tournament in Austria, I believe, and get a couple of wins there. And then it was like, okay, he checked out. But let's see if he can come back with renewed vigor. He's obviously not always had a lot of success in New York, which again may give him added motivation. I say not had a lot of success there. He's won it 3 times. I think most people would be just happy to win it once. And Daniel Medvedev is that person who's won it once. Medvedev, where are we at right now compared to where we were, say, for example, a few months ago, or particularly 12 months ago, and his run as well in Toronto?
Yeah, I don't think we've really acknowledged or talked about just how much of a shock defeat that was to de Minaur. I think especially when the way he jumped out to that lead in the first set. Was it 5-1, 5-2? And to lose from there was extremely surprising. And this is the one thing with Medvedev, right? I think there's times where a problem is posed to him and he can't seem to find a solution right away. That then you start to see the unraveling a little bit. And I think, de Minaur, his defense, getting to every ball, his speed, I think that was something that just sort of irked Medvedev as the match went on. I think, again, going back to, thinking about Wimbledon and his best pathway forward, at some point, someone has to sit him down and get him to be just that bit more aggressive. And I think, he's obviously going to have the success on the hard court, and he's proven on this surface. But I think there is a higher ceiling to him when I watch his overall play. And I think if he can just crank it up a little bit in terms of the aggression, I think there is a higher ceiling to be had.
I can't remember which match it was last week, but I think he won it on a match point return. And I thought to myself, there's been a lot of speculation about him mixing up his return position. But I think perhaps a little bit about what you're touching on there. Maybe it's not so much the position, because I think the opposite end in terms of position on the court, Caroline Garcia is in exactly the same conundrum. She said to me earlier on this year, she said she doesn't know really how to return in any other way. And I think teaching a dog new tricks with Daniel Medvedev, particularly at his age, which in tennis terms is he's at least halfway through his career, I think there's not much you can do now. He's not going to be someone who's standing on the baseline or being aggressive in that sense, like a Holger Rune as well on the return. But he can just do different things on the return to make Carlos, for example, in particular, think about attacking the net, or Novak as well, who's done that against Daniel as well before. So I think that might be the way around this little thing. It might not cure the problem, but it might offer a solution, albeit temporarily on certain points. Listen, I know we mentioned De Minaur earlier, but we have sort of skated past him, but now we can bring it back with him obviously knocking Medvedev out. He beat Cam Norrie as well as Taylor Fritz and David Fokina. So there's some pretty good wins in there that, I would think of players such as Zverev, who didn't have a top 10 win, I think, at slams for such a long time. And I think of other players as well who've barely had top 10 wins. And I'm not quite sure where Casper Ruud's record is right now, but I'm sure, put it like this, you know what I'm getting at. This run to the final is quite impressive. Now, I know the name Gabriel Diallo probably stands out a bit there, but of course he beat Dan Evans in the first round. Give us a word on De Minaur and the week that he had.
Yeah, I mean, first off, his confidence has got to be sky high, because when you look at his recent play, he's got the finals in Queens, right? He's got the finals in Los Cabos, where he lost to Tsitsipas, and now he gets to the finals here. So I think from a confidence standpoint, he's got to be feeling really, really good. I think, again, when you get yourself deep in tournaments and you play the best players and you're regularly going up against the top five, you lose to Novak at the Australian Open. There's no shame in that. I think you pick up bits and pieces in what works, what doesn't work at the very, very top level. And you take these incremental steps. And I think we're seeing that with De Minaur. And we talk about ceiling with Medvedev. I think he is someone who is really actualizing his ceiling. And, maybe he doesn't win a slam, but I think we've seen enough now to believe that, if things go right in a week, he can pull off a 1,000 win at some point.
Sure. I think that's about where probably we'll end up with De Minaur. Is he's someone that, hopefully will pick up a big title or two, but probably a run to a slam win might well elude him, at least the level that he's shown us so far. He may well go and surprise us in a second half of a career where you've had players to some extent, Medvedev, but of course someone like Dominic Thiem as well, who've got better as their 20s have gone on. Listen, I think we'll come to the Canadian players next. I mean, we had Diallo. I mean, actually, a mix. Is it not a mixed bag? I heard you chuckle there, and you probably. I mean, I'm thinking about Raonic, Tick, Diallo, who we just had on the screen there as well. Tick for sure. I mean, Felix is clearly a cross. Shapovalov unfortunately had to pull out injured. I might be missing one or two Canadians, but let's begin with Raonic, I think. Were you surprised by his week?
Yeah, absolutely. I was surprised. When you look at the matchup on paper against Francis Tiafoe, you're thinking that Tiafoe should absolutely have that. And I think for Raonic to be away as long as he has and to come back and show the level that he's shown, obviously his serve is just so difficult. The top players have talked about how difficult it is to read. And so I think that was huge for him. And, he was able to do enough with his net play, enough with the ground strokes to get into the third. And I think just playing a third match in 4 days was going to be too much to ask. You think of the layoff, you think about where his match fitness is at. A third match in 4 days. I mean, I was thinking it might have even affected him in the second match, right? Having just played a 3-setter against Francis Tiafoe. So even to get that second round win was a big deal, I thought. And so huge moment to beat Francis Tiafoe in that atmosphere, and not let the net post incident bother him in the end. But I think for sure Milos Raonic is a tick, and I can tell you, if he's good to go for the U.S. Open, that first round matchup, that's probably not a guy you want in the first round.
No, if he's serving well, as you said, like he did against Tiafoe, and actually also in his next match too. What I think was encouraging, or was something for me palpable, was he was just going for it on his second serve as well. I mean, he picked up a few double faults as well, but there's a few second serve aces. And perhaps it's just a thought that, keeping these points as short as he possibly can. But I didn't see that win against Tiafoe coming, particularly at the end of the first set when you mentioned that last point where Tiafoe wins it, despite the fact that when we're watching it initially, we're seeing him run into the net. And those of us pretty eagle-eyed would suggest that we all saw that it hadn't bounced twice. In other words, the ball would be dead before he touched the net. But we weren't still eagle-eyed as much as Fergus Murphy was, or at least retrospectively, to notice that, of course, he touched a part of the net, which is the doubles part of the net, and therefore doesn't count in a singles match. Have you got anything else to add to that little tale?
It's very rare that we give credit to umpires. And so I think we have to on this occasion. I thought the way he handled it as well when Raonic and Tiafoe approached him and kind of said, hey, hang on. I know the rule here. Let me just explain it, and you'll see where I'm coming from. Raonic wasn't having it either way, but
no,
I think he handled it superbly. And that's
I've gone for a bit of a Raonic look tonight today, by the way. I don't know if you...
Yeah. No,
I hadn't. I was going to say if you hadn't noticed, but the truth is I hadn't even given it a second thought until But this is Raonic like the old Raonic, not the 2.0 that we're seeing now.
Yeah, we can call it a half Milos and a half Tsitsipas.
Yeah.
But I thought Fergus Murphy handled that moment extremely well. To be right on it with the rule, that's something that you might see someone forget or fail to apply in that situation. And so it was great that he was right on it. And again, I think there's absolutely nothing bad that you could say about Milos Raonic in this Toronto run. Yeah,
it was a lot of fun. I see that he's pulled out of Cincinnati, but as you say, if he's a first round, I think I've spoken to one or two guys lower down the rankings, and there is a train of thought. If you're outside the top 100, for example, if you're in your mid to late 20s and you're desperate to get in that top 100 and get automatic places at slams, that in a way you don't want to be playing one of the big guys in the first round. You want to get them a bit later on. But on the flip side, this is probably the moment when you might catch them cold. You might get a set off them. And if you get the first set, with the exception of perhaps Novak, who knows what can happen from there. I certainly think that's certainly the case against Rafa, albeit that obviously we're not going to see Rafa for a few more months at the very least. But if Raonic is up against, let's say he's up against Novak, he can win a set. And if you've won a set, and off you go. And I think, you wouldn't want to face him in the first round if he's just hot as he was for certainly 2 or 3 matches here in Canada. Any words on Diallo? Because really, I don't know a lot about him other than the fact that I know he beat Dan Evans at a challenger early this year. I saw the match. And I think from Dan Evans' side of the net, there may have been a bit of a hangover from Washington. There was one anecdote that I would draw from that match, which I thought was quite amusing. And I sensed it. There was 1 or 2 points towards the end of the match. I think Dan was a breakdown in the second set, so staring down the barrel. And Dan would go and win a point 30-15. It's not a big point, 30-30 all to 30-40, or break back and you're back on serve, or a big moment in a tiebreak. But Dan Evans was celebrating these points, and I think he was trying to apply some experience pressure on the younger shoulders on the other side of the net, where he's going, I'm still in this, rather than, I don't think he would have celebrated those points if he was a set and a breakdown to Novak, put it that way. I don't just mean in terms of belief. I think he was just trying to show the other side of the net. But hats off to Diallo. Straight sets win over Dan Evans. Do you know much about him, by the way?
I first started to notice when he became part of the Davis Cup team
Okay.
last year, and so I think I had just learned a little bit about him. I hadn't watched him much, and obviously, being 6'7", he's got the big serve, and I think what's impressive is his movement. Right, I think at that size to move as well as he does is where you start to think, okay, maybe this can be something. I think. Uh, I like that he's decided to enter, these ATP Tour events this year, and obviously this was his first tour level win, and he's had a few losses before that. But I think you accelerate your growth a little bit if you can take these lessons in the right way. And I think he has a good head on his shoulder. He's talked about what the losses have done for him in terms
Mhm.
of helping him progress and learn. And so I'm encouraged by that. And yeah, I think in terms of the physical stature, the serve is gonna hold pretty well for him. And then it's just a question of putting together the other elements, and maybe you know him watching Milos Raonic can give him a bit of inspiration in terms of what he could maybe be. But I'm not going to set the expectations that high. What Raonic has accomplished in his career is incredible. To be a top 5 player, to make a Wimbledon final, those are very, very lofty goals. And if Diallo comes anywhere close to that, I'm sure he'll be thrilled.
Absolutely. Now we'll come to a less positive element right now to Canadian tennis. I remember almost exactly a year ago to the day, Vivek, I think the first show we did together, I did a sort of, a next big three sort of show on I think it was, I certainly had Felix and obviously I had Carlos. And I think that the third player I chose was Yannick Sinner. Are these the three that I was talking about skipping a generation because Tsitsipas has certainly had an inconsistent couple of years. At that point, Medvedev was certainly on a downer, and we all know what's happened to Dominic Thiem and also Zverev. But Felix is 9 months, probably, I should say, since that indoor season, has sort of gradually gone down. I think probably a bit off the radar to some extent. He gets a pass, I think, for the clay court season largely. But yeah, and he had 1 or 2 injuries as well. So I think, again, people that were following him would say, well, just give him another few matches. But I think he's on a losing streak of 4 or 5 at the moment. And each one seems to get worse. The one he had in Washington, Watanuki, I think I suggested it was a new low, although 1 or 2 people I knew disagreed with me, and that's fine, giving credit to his opponent. But I think this defeat on home turf on his birthday, no less, sharing a birthday with Roger Federer, I believe, as well, did represent a new low, despite how well I thought Purcell played.
100%. I think what adds to the disappointment of everything that we've seen this year is the way he closed out last year, right? And I think to win 3 titles in a row, to lead Canada to its first ever Davis Cup title, I think you're thinking he's taking that confidence into this year. And you think about even the 5-set French Open loss to Rafa Nadal, the 5-set Australian Open loss to Daniil Medvedev.
Mm-hmm.
You're thinking, there's a breakthrough moment coming.
Yeah.
And you thought winning those 3 ATP titles were like, okay, getting over the hump here, get some confidence, all of that. And it just hasn't happened for him this year. I know he had food poisoning before that matchup against Fabio Fognini at the French, but
Okay.
I do think that overall, it's just been really, really disappointing for a player who has, up to this point, up to 2023, made those incremental gains year after year. And that's why we've put him in that category, right, of being the next big 3. And absolutely, I would have been right with you in saying that it should have been Felix, Yannick, and Alcaraz.
Mm-hmm.
And now you would absolutely put Holger Rune ahead of it,
Yes.
right?
Definitely.
And you would put those 3 as the new big 3.
Definitely, yeah. I think the thing with Felix that at least can give you hope, though, is that I think the ceiling is still there. I mean, actually, ceilings rarely go. The two things you have is a floor and obviously a ceiling. And I think Yannick Sinner is complimented, rightly so, on his floor, if you like, in terms of FLOOR rather than FLAW, in that he's got a high floor. But I think with somebody like Felix, that is somewhere that you can improve, and is actually probably a little bit easier to improve than a ceiling. Somebody who's arguably, well, on the women's side, somebody like Sharapova, who I think probably exceeded. She was a very talented player, but I think she was a worker and probably exceeded her talent level, if you like. That's not criticizing, but you know what I mean. I just think that there is something to work out with Felix, and this could just be a spell. I mean, there's been players that have gone on to win multiple Grand Slams that have had probably far worse runs of form than this, but with each defeat, more questions get asked. He's got age on his side, and he does seem to be in a bit of a rut. Who knows? A few weeks from now, he could be reaching the latter stages in New York, and things are much better. I think there is probably another point though to this, which is I don't really know if the solutions seem to be there at the moment. If he can, I remember speaking to Stefanos Tsitsipas earlier this year after a defeat to Carlos Alcaraz in Barcelona, and I think what was most chilling for him about that particular loss was he didn't know how to answer the questions that we were posing in the media, but even I'm sure he was posing himself, didn't really know how to come up with a solution. And I think when you're in that situation, it is quite concerning, because I think if you're a top player with a top mentality, in your computer is that you can be world number one. And if you think that that's going to be the case, or can be the case, you should be able to beat anyone on any given day. And I think the chilling fact that was starting to come to roost with Tsitsipas on that occasion against Carlos is there may never be a solution for him against Carlos. And if Felix gets into this sort of, it's a slightly different scenario, but I just wonder if he knows what the issue is right now. Maybe he does. Maybe he can just put it down to sort of lack of match practice, as you highlighted, food poisoning in Paris, or I think he's had 1 or 2 wrist injuries this year. But I'm not sure if he quite knows what the exact issue is right now.
I would say that the one thing that does concern me about his ceiling is the fact that to this point, I don't think he's tactically at a level that he needs to be. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. I haven't seen that ability to think his way through matches and think his way through problems that are being presented to him. And it's almost as if he goes in, this is plan A. Well, plan A is not working, so I've got nothing. And I think that's what's so thrilling about Carlos Alcaraz, right? He just, a problem is posed and he's like, I've got a different solution. My game has so many different options that we're just going to go to something else here and we'll see how that goes. And I think with Felix, that's a leap that he needs to make to become a Grand Slam champion one day. And I think he's got to go back to the drawing board in terms of that regard, I feel, because it's one thing to be shocked in the first round, whatever it is. It's another to have, issues presented in the first round and just have no alternate to go to. Mm-hmm, and I think that's what concerns me.
A shout out for Gael Monfils, who's sort of in a way joining the comeback club on both sides of the tour. We mentioned Raonic earlier, but he played some electric tennis last week. Eubank's victory springing to mind, but I mean the win over Tsitsipas arguably even more impressive. Are there any other stories in Canada you'd like to touch on? Because I do just want to get your thoughts very quickly on Cincinnati before we wrap.
Did we want to touch on the women at all?
No, sorry, we're just doing Vivek. This is oh my goodness me! If we were doing the women, we'd be here for another hour. No, we have two separate shows, Vivek. So don't worry, we give the women.
No, I just meant
we've done a women's show earlier on today. But are there any other stories on the men's side?
Yeah, I think Felix. We're going to touch on Cincinnati, but he's got a tough first round match up there. He's going up against Matteo Berrettini.
Yeah,
so it doesn't get any
about
easier.
Half an hour, I think.
Yeah, so it doesn't get any easier, and so I think the key for him, for Shapovalov, is just being brutally honest with themselves, and I think if they're able to do that and be constructive about it, I think there are solutions to be had. I don't think this year should be something that takes away from what Felix could be at his peak. And I think he's got to realize that. But I think he's also, got to have some urgency now, in the sense that, you know, you've just turned 23, and so this is the age when you've really got to get going in terms of, do I want to be a 5-time champ? Do I want to, that window starts to close really quickly once you get to 27, 28. And so I think this is the age where things really have to start happening.
For those of you curious about the women's side in Canada, we did a show earlier on, but you can find that in the episodes on YouTube. I think it was done a couple of hours ago with Anastasia and James. Listen, let's look therefore towards Cincinnati. You mentioned Berrettini and Felix, who, rain permitting, should be getting underway shortly. But one or two people in the live chat telling me it's fine. I'm just sharing this. Of course, they played in the Wimbledon quarterfinal a couple of years ago. I mean, they were the pretenders to Novak's crown just 2 years ago at SW19. And here they are meeting in the first round in Cincinnati. Novak Djokovic, of course, returning in North America. You touched on earlier how you probably see him as a slight favorite in New York coming up in a couple of weeks. Give us some thoughts on him as he sort of returns to the tour.
Yeah, Novak, you mentioned potentially, coasting through a little bit. I think he will look at this event as something to just get a few matches in. I don't think he'll be too concerned about winning it. And we saw the quote, what was it in Rome when he lost, and people were asking him about his confidence going into the French Open and if he believed he could win, and he just gave a plain and simple yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think this is going to play out very much the same way if he gets a couple matches in. I think that's part of why he's entered the doubles as well. And I think
he's entered the doubles in Cincinnati, has he?
Yeah. I believe he's playing with Kacic.
Okay.
And I think it's just a question of getting those couple matches in and feeling good. And then once he gets that out of the way, I don't think he'll be looking to expend too much energy before the US Open.
Yeah, all makes sense. I see things very similarly in that I think he'll, of course, if he gets to the semis or the final, he'll want to win, but I don't think he'll be too concerned. He may be trying certain things out and in a way, getting 3 or 4 matches in, whether you win or lose the third or the fourth one is the most important thing. And then whatever happens, he'll have a week off anyway before New York. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with Carlos. Perhaps another quarterfinal defeat. There won't be alarm bells ringing or anything like that, but it will just make maybe 1 or 2 of his opponents have a bit more belief. I'm sure when Tommy Paul plays him again, he won't be short of belief, but that Tommy Paul defeat and then followed by, let's say, another early-ish exit in Cincinnati might give his opponents a bit more food for thought. And so I think that will be interesting. Are there any other narratives in Cincinnati? Borna Coric, of course, last year's champion. We talked about certain people's form. Well, he's going to be really dropping down the rankings if he doesn't produce heroics in Cincinnati.
Yeah, that's a great call. I think this is going to be a tough one to see him try and repeat. It's going to be a huge challenge. And I think, as far as narratives are concerned, I think the big one is just, Carlos Alcaraz probably, getting himself back in gear and getting set for the US Open. Francis Tiafoe is probably looking for a bounce back. After what happened against Raonic. And so he'll want to, feel good about himself going into the US Open. So he's probably someone I'm looking at and saying, hey, he's going to come out all guns blazing and saying, hey, let's get things right going into that. And yeah, I'll quickly add, Djokovic is playing with Kacic against Jamie Murray.
Okay.
And, Michael Venus in the doubles.
Nice. So, yeah, I mean, listen, regarding tennis and how it always is, 99% of the players going into each tournament, there is a question, if you like, of when you were mentioning Francis Tiafoe, I was thinking, oh yeah, that's true. He'll have a few things that he wants to get answered, but with the exception of probably Novak and Carlos, week in, week out, there's other than, and then the previous winner. So Yannick is obviously on a high right now, but most other players, whether it be Medvedev, Tsitsipas, for sure, this time of year, there's a bit of scrutiny on him in terms of his record generally throughout this period. I know we got to the semis, I think, in Cincinnati a year ago. No, we got to the final in Cincinnati, actually. But I think the defeat to Djokovic was disappointing. So there seems to be questions over so many players. Any more thoughts that I haven't touched upon that you're desperate to share regarding either Canada or Cincinnati?
No, I think we've touched on a lot here. Maybe just quickly I'll throw in, Hubie Hurkacz looking pretty good. And I thought, again, Alcaraz was not at his best here in Canada, but I thought that was a pretty tense match that could have gone a bit differently. And so maybe he's another one that's looking at Cincinnati and saying, hey, what's there to build here and carry into the US Open.
Vivek, I'm glad you mentioned him and also that match. I didn't get to see it, unfortunately, because it was pretty late here in Europe, but people were getting very excited and giddy about that match being match of the year. I didn't see it, but I know how close it was, and I know how so many matches involving Novak can be spectacular. But Hubie is certainly somebody who tends to like the North American elements to the tour, both earlier on in the season and later, so I think that's a good shout. Vivek, big thanks for joining us today, and I hope that our paths will cross again pretty soon.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, John, and looking forward to the United game.
Yes, exactly. We're 4 hours away from United's first match of the season. For those of you wondering which United, of course, Vivek and I share a passion for Manchester United, and they're getting their Premier League season underway this evening. So I will have to take a couple of hours off at the very least from tennis, maybe a bit longer if we are celebrating a glorious win. If we lose, I'll be desperate to get back to the racket and ball rather than just the ball sport. Vivek, you've got. I think I saw a few things behind you. I saw a World Cup.
Something you might appreciate.
Go on.
This is. I don't want it to fall apart on me here, but
we're used to things falling apart on this show. Don't worry. Oh my goodness me! Don't fall. No, fingers crossed that. Oh, nice. Did you have to put that together, or was it just like this?
I put that all together. That's Old Trafford right there.
There you go. Nice bit of dexterity in there, and good work. I can see a World Cup as well. I can see you've got a trophy behind you. I've also got a trophy on mine. This is a neighborhood of Bonn over 40s tennis trophy that I earned a year ago. Not for many people. It's not exactly the US Open, but it's something like that. What's that trophy there that you're holding?
This one is actually from a cricket tournament.
Okay.
And then I've got a few medals here. One's tennis and one is cricket. A couple others as well. But
you span even. I mean, I span sports reasonably, but of course, tennis and soccer or football is my main passions. But I know what's certainly going on in the cricket world. But for those of you who are unaware, make sure you give Vivek a follow on Twitter, because whether you follow basketball or soccer or tennis, American football, do you follow that too?
No. So my big four are basketball, soccer, tennis, cricket.
There you go. Cricket as well, of course. Yeah. So if you're a fan of any of those four sports in particular, give Vivek a follow on social media. I've just added him on Instagram. Added is not the right one. Followed on Instagram, I think is the.
There you go. Followed. Yeah, we followed each other.
Some people try and sound cool by not knowing really much about Instagram. I am still quite new to it in terms of I created an account with Talking Tennis. Yeah, that's it. Follow anyway. But there we go. So make sure you give Vivek across all the social medias a follow, an add, a like, or whatever the correct verb is. Vivek, big thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, John. Anytime.
And I'm sure we'll be crossing paths again very, very soon. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell so you don't miss out on all things